Welcome to the Music Artist Deep Dive Podcast.
Before he invented the sound of Teenage Rebellion, Chuck Berry was, well, a beautician.
A beautician.
Right,
Yep.
and a janitor, and a convicted armed robber who couldn't even find a working pistol for his crime spree.
It really is wild when you lay it all out like
It's
that.
completely insane. So welcome, everyone. Today we are doing a deep dives into a huge stack of sources, mostly biographical deep dives from Wikipedia and biography.com to really deconstruct the actual blueprint of rock and roll.
Yeah, and more importantly, the mission of this deep dive is to, examine the incredibly complex and deeply flawed architect who actually built it.
Exactly. Because the man behind that famous sound is, well, he's a puzzle that most people haven't even tried to put together.
Right. I mean, we all know the music intimately, but the history behind it is just far more chaotic than your standard, success story.
And that is exactly the hook for you today.
Yeah.
Everyone listening right now recognizes that driving guitar riff of Johnny B. Good.
Oh, instantly.
But very few realize the bizarre trajectory that led to its creation. I mean, we're talking about a journey involving an uncompromising insistence on being paid in brown paper bags, a literal degree in cosmetology, and a trail of severe legal controversies.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really comprehend where that unique sonic signature came from, we have to start in the rigidly divided world of St. Louis in the 1920s and 30s.
Yeah, the environment he was born into in 1926 was Charles Edward Anderson Barry's first profound limitation. But it was also his first real source of inspiration.
How so?
Well, he grew up in a North St. Louis neighborhood called the Ville. And this was a totally self-contained middle-class black community.
Right.
His father worked as a contractor and a church deacon. And his mother, she achieved something incredibly rare for a black woman of her generation. She was a certified public school principal.
Wow. That's huge for that era.
Oh, definitely. But the segregation in St. Louis during this time was just so absolute.
Yeah, the sources detail a story about his childhood that honestly stopped me cold. He was so isolated within the Ville that he didn't even encounter a white person until he was 3 years old.
Yeah, that story is wild.
He saw this crew of white firemen putting out a fire in his neighborhood, and as a toddler, he genuinely thought their faces were white because they were terrified of the flames.
Right, like they were just pale with fear.
Exactly. His father actually had to sit him down and explain that, no, there were people whose skin was permanently that color.
What's fascinating here is that that image really illustrates the sheer compartmentalization of American society at the time. I mean,
Right.
they were totally separate worlds.
Yeah.
But despite that intense boundary, his musical curiosity flourished pretty early on. He began singing in his church choir at age 6.
Right.
And later, he attended Sumner High School, which actually holds the distinction of being the first all-black high school west of the Mississippi.
Wow. Okay.
And there's this great story where he performed at a school talent show, and he just shocked the administration by singing this rather crude blues song.
Of course he did.
Yeah, the faculty was appalled, naturally,
Mhm.
but the student body, they went totally wild.
I mean, he certainly wasn't just a rebellious choir boy, though, because in 1944, when he was just 17, his life took this massive detour.
A very serious detour.
Yeah, he and a few friends dropped out of high school and decided to take this impromptu road trip to California, but they only made it as far as Kansas City before they stumbled upon an abandoned, non-functional pistol in a parking lot.
Right, a broken gun.
Exactly. Armed with a broken gun, they initiated a robbery spree. I mean, they hit bakeries, clothing stores, barbershops, and eventually they even stole a car.
Yeah, and the law caught up with him very quickly. He ended up receiving the maximum penalty, which was 10 years.
10 years for a spree with a broken gun. Wow.
Yeah, so the state sent him to the Algoa Reformatory in Missouri. He didn't serve the full 10, though. He ended up serving 3 years and was released on his 21st birthday in 1947.
Right.
But even inside the reformatory, you could see his drive. I mean, he took up boxing and he formed a singing quartet.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and this group was actually polished enough that the authorities permitted them to leave the facility grounds to perform for outside audiences.
That's incredible. So once he got out, he married his wife, Fametta, and settled into this string of, surprisingly conventional jobs.
Right, he was just trying to make a living.
Yeah, he worked for his father's construction business, pushed a broom as a janitor, took shifts at an auto plant, and this is my favorite detail, he trained at the Poro College of Cosmetology to become a beautician.
It's so unexpected, right?
Yeah.
But the man possessed an incredible work ethic. He was constantly seeking a steady income, and throughout all of this, music just remained his side hustle.
Right, playing on the weekends and stuff.
Exactly. He took formal guitar lessons from a jazz musician friend named Ira Harris, and he really studied the intricate blues phrasing of T-Bone Walker. But the real turning point arrived in 1953 when he joined Johnny Johnson's trio. They held a residency at the Cosmopolitan, which was this upscale black nightclub in East St. Louis. And this residency basically became his laboratory.
Yeah, the alchemy that happened in that club is just fascinating. So he's playing standard R&B to a predominantly black audience, and then he starts casually injecting white country music into the set list.
Dropping it in there.
Right. And initially, the crowd is totally baffled. The sources note they were laughing, like whispering to each other, wondering who this black hillbilly was playing at the Cosmo.
Yeah, they thought it was a joke at first.
But eventually, the laughter turned into requests. They started dancing to it. And looking at this process, it feels less like an artistic accident and more like intentional cultural hacking, you know?
Oh, totally.
Like, he took the heavy code of Chicago R&B, spliced it with white country music, and forged this entirely new thing that completely short-circuited the racial divides of the 1950s. But I'm curious, did the sources indicate if this was like a cynical financial calculation on his part or just genuine artistic curiosity?
Well, Berry was actually remarkably transparent about his motivations. He explicitly stated his intention was to hold the attention of both the black and white clientele by speaking to them in their customary musical tongues.
Oh, so it was calculated.
Very much so. What's fascinating here is that by playing hillbilly music, he was actively testing the structural boundaries of a segregated society. It functioned as a literal Trojan horse.
Wow.
Right audiences began showing up at this black club because the country melodies sounded familiar to them, yet the driving rhythm underneath was entirely alien and intoxicating. He recognized that while the cultures were kept miles apart physically, the music could bridge that gap instantly.
That's brilliant. But I mean, the Cosmopolitan Club was a great laboratory, but you can't change the world from one room in East St. Louis.
Right.
To achieve the kind of scale his ambitions demanded, he needed a catalyst. Which leads us to his fateful 1955 trip to Chicago.
Yeah, he traveled there specifically seeking a record deal and managed to meet the legendary bluesman Muddy Waters. And Waters pointed him toward Leonard Chess of Chess Records.
Okay.
Now, Berry walked into that audition assuming his traditional slow blues tracks were going to be his ticket to fame. But Leonard Chess possessed this brilliant ear for the shifting marketplace. He dismissed the traditional blues entirely and latched onto Berry's upbeat, country-infused cover of an old traditional tune called Ida Red.
Right, so they took Ida Red into the studio and basically completely reverse engineered it.
Exactly.
They brought in Johnny Johnson on piano, established this massive driving beat, and handed Jerome Green a pair of maracas. And they renamed the track Maybelline, which Berry later joked the title came from a cow he knew.
Yeah, a cow, which is just such a Berry detail.
It really is. And the song just exploded. It sold over 1 million copies, hit #1 on the R&B charts, and even crossed over to #5 on the pop charts. But can we break down the mechanics of why that specific arrangement worked so well? Like, what made it a revolution rather than just a catchy cover?
It really comes down to the sonic mechanism of syncopation and momentum. Country music at the time often relied on a very steady, unthreatening 24 rhythm.
Right.
But Chess and Berry applied this heavy, aggressive backbeat to that country structure. And the addition of the maracas is absolutely crucial here.
Why the maracas?
Well, they provided this relentless, high-frequency hiss that actually mimicked the sound of an engine or a speeding train. They essentially mechanized country music,
Yeah.
Injecting it with urban adrenaline. It just sounded like forward motion.
That makes so much sense. But while the music was revolutionary, the business practices behind it were decidedly archaic. Because when Berry received the first pressing of the record, he discovered that a prominent white DJ named Alan Freed was listed as a co-writer.
Yeah, this was a blatant kickback scheme. It's often called payola.
Right.
Listing a powerful DJ as a co-writer ensured they received a cut of the royalties, which essentially guaranteed the record would get heavy rotation on the radio.
Wow. Just legally bribing them, basically.
Exactly. But rather than quietly accepting this as the cost of doing business, Berry took the incredibly risky step of suing. He fought the label and the DJ in court, and he actually successfully won his sole writing credit back.
Which is huge for a black artist in the 1950s. And that victory fundamentally shaped how he operated moving forward. He developed this highly specific lyrical formula. He started writing explicitly about fast cars, high school dances, and the burgeoning consumer culture.
Yeah, he zeroed right in on it.
But there is a massive irony here that I just cannot get over. The defining anthems of innocent 1950s teenage life, I mean, songs like School Days and Sweet Little 16,
Right.
were engineered by a 30-something-year-old ex-convict.
It's quite the contrast.
It really is. I have to push back here. Was Barry operating like a modern algorithmic pop producer? Like, was he simply engineering the equivalent of viral TikTok hits, feeding a demographic exactly what it wanted to hear to maximize profits, without actually caring about the culture itself?
That's a great question. The critic John Pareles touches on this in the sources. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the very concept of the teenager was a post-World War II invention.
Right, before that you were just a kid and then an adult.
Exactly. Prior to the 1950s, you were a child, and then you entered the workforce. Suddenly, there was this massive youth demographic with disposable income and their own distinct anxieties and desires.
Okay.
And Barry didn't just sing to them, he validated their entire existence. He basically invented rock as a music of, as Pareles put it, teenage wishes fulfilled in good times. So yes, it was absolutely calculated, but the calculation required profound empathy and observation.
That's a good point.
He recognized a newly formed demographic and learned to speak their language with absolute precision.
But, translating that precise studio sound to a live audience requires a completely different skill set. I mean, you cannot engineer a song about unstoppable momentum and then just stand perfectly still on stage,
Definitely not.
which necessitates a look at the physical vocabulary he invented, specifically the iconic duck walk.
Yes, the duck walk. That one-legged hop and stoop really became the defining posture of rock guitar swagger. But what is fascinating is how a move that radiates such pure, aggressive showmanship actually originated in physical comedy.
Right. The sources explain he invented the motion as a child in his family's living room. He would bend his knees deeply, keeping his back and head perfectly vertical, and just walk under a table to retrieve a ball purely to make his family laugh.
Such a goofy image.
It is. And then years later, he pulls out this childhood gag during a concert in New York. A journalist dubs it the duck walk, and a visual icon is born. It feels like he used physical comedy to lower the intimidation factor of his blistering guitar solos, making himself approachable while completely dominating the stage.
It was a brilliant piece of staging. Over time, however, that exuberant showmanship calcified into a famously ruthless approach to touring. As he moved into the 1970s and 80s, the warm, engaging performer transformed into an incredibly isolated operator.
Yeah, he completely abandoned the concept of a dedicated backup band. He just traveled alone, carrying nothing but his Gibson guitar.
Just him and the guitar.
His touring contract stipulated that the local promoter in whatever city he played had to provide a pickup band of local musicians. And some of those uncredited kids he hired for the night turned out to be future legends, including Bruce Springsteen and Steve Miller.
Yeah, but the working conditions for those local musicians were notorious. Bruce Springsteen actually recounted his experience backing up Barry in a documentary.
Oh, really? What did he say?
Well, the band received no rehearsal and no set list. Barry simply walked on stage, launched into a guitar intro, and accepted the band to instantly identify the key and keep up.
That sounds terrifying for a young musician.
Oh, absolutely. And once the show ended, he would leave without speaking a single word to the musicians who had just backed him.
And then there is the financial protocol. His contract demanded payment entirely upfront in a brown paper bag.
Always the paper bag.
He would physically transfer the stacks of cash into his personal briefcase before he would even consider walking toward the stage. Looking at this practice, it strongly resembles the modern gig economy. Like, he treated his own legendary catalog like an Uber-driving side hustle.
That's a really interesting way to frame it.
Right. He dropped into a city, extracted the cash, utilized expendable local labor, and just vanished. But did this strategy actively sabotage his legacy, turning him into a chaotic nostalgia act playing with out-of-tune bands?
Well, critics at the time certainly felt it diminished the quality of his live shows. But to understand the behavior, you really have to examine the psychology driving it. His insistence on upfront cash and his refusal to trust a regular band was a direct trauma response.
It's from the Paola stuff.
Exactly. The betrayal he experienced early in his career, specifically that Alan Freed incident where his intellectual property was basically stolen, left a permanent mark. He stated in various interviews that after experiencing the rampant exploitation of the music industry, the only two things he could genuinely rely on were the wood and wire of his guitar and fiscal currency in his hand.
Wow. But that profound paranoia, that intense survivalist mentality, did not remain confined to his contract negotiations. It bled extensively into his personal life, leading to a highly destructive trajectory.
It did.
And it is time to address the controversies and the severe criminal convictions that permanently stained his legacy.
Yeah, understanding Chuck Berry requires acknowledging the serious legal offenses that followed him for decades. And these were not minor infractions. They were major federal and civil cases.
Right. And for those of you listening, we are going to navigate this by looking strictly at the timeline and facts presented in our sources. The first major incident occurred in December 1959 when Berry was arrested under the Mann Act. The Mann Act, formerly known as the White Slave Traffic Act of 1910, is a federal law originally aimed at human trafficking, making it a felony to transport individuals across state lines for illicit purposes. He was accused of transporting a 14-year-old Apache waitress named Janice Escalante from Texas to St. Louis to work at his club and for sexual purposes.
And the legal battle there was protracted and bitter. A jury convicted him in 1960, resulting in a 5-year sentence. He appealed the ruling, successfully arguing that the judge's overtly racist comments during the proceedings had prejudiced the jury.
Right, so the conviction was overturned.
It was, but the prosecution tried him a second time in 1961. He was convicted again. Ultimately, he served a year and a half in federal prison from early 1962 to late 1963.
The sources emphasize that this specific stint in prison fundamentally altered his personality. Carl Perkins, a fellow pioneer of rockabilly who toured with him in 1964, observed a drastic change.
What did Perkins say?
Perkins noted that before the conviction, Berry was an easygoing guy who would happily swap jokes in the dressing room. But after his release, Perkins described him as cold, real distant, and bitter.
Yeah. And the 1960s conviction was not an isolated chapter. The legal issues really spanned 4 distinct decades.
Right.
In 1979, he pleaded guilty to evading nearly $110,000 in federal income tax, leading to a 120-day prison sentence. In 1987, he faced charges for assaulting a woman at a New York hotel, which ended in a guilty plea to a lesser charge of harassment.
And the timeline extends into 1990 with a massive civil lawsuit. Several women sued him, alleging he had secretly installed a video camera in the women's restroom of a restaurant he owned called the Southern Air.
Yeah, the Southern Air incident.
His defense team claimed the camera was installed to catch an employee suspected of stealing. While criminal guilt was never proven in court for this specific allegation, authorities executed a raid and found intimate videotapes in his possession. He eventually opted for a class action settlement with the plaintiffs, costing him over $1.2 million.
The sheer scale of this timeline is staggering.
Yeah.
I mean, he remained an active, revered cultural icon while repeatedly violating the law and the basic trust of the people around him from the Eisenhower era straight through to the 1990s.
So, what does this all mean? How are you, the listener, supposed to process this duality? We are looking at a man universally dubbed the Shakespeare of rock and roll, a title he earned, while simultaneously acknowledging he was a convicted serial offender. Does the music industry's tolerance for his behavior over those 40 years reflect a broader systemic failure?
This raises an important question, right? The biographical texts we are analyzing do not attempt to reconcile this tension, nor do they offer excuses. They simply present a stark, often contradictory portrait. You have an individual who undeniably shattered towering musical and racial barriers, creating a unified youth culture. Simultaneously, he committed serious crimes and left behind real victims. The separation of art and artist is an eternal debate, but in Berry's case, the brilliance and the toxicity were housed in the exact same mind. You cannot erase the cultural earthquake of his music, just as you cannot erase the damage caused by his actions.
It is a tension that totally defies a clean resolution. Yet, the physical footprint he left on the world is so massive it borders on the cosmic. Wrapping up this deep dive into his legacy, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which made him their very first inductee, offered a definitive statement.
What was it?
They noted that while no single person invented rock and roll, Chuck Berry comes the absolute closest of any single human being to putting all the essential pieces together.
And that's incredibly accurate. He provided the genre with its defining attitude. He elevated the guitar solo from a brief instrumental break to the absolute focal point of the band. John Lennon famously summarized his impact by saying, "If you tried to give rock and roll another name, you might call it Chuck Berry."
Wow. And his devotion to his instrument remained absolute until the very end. When he passed away in 2017 at the age of 90, his family buried him with a cherry red Gibson ES-355 physically bolted to the inside lid of his coffin.
That's quite the image.
It is, and his reach literally extends past the boundaries of our planet. Johnny B. Goode is the only rock and roll song included on the Voyager Golden Record, a disc currently hurtling through interstellar space, intended to represent humanity to the cosmos.
To go from a rigidly segregated neighborhood in St. Louis to the edge of the solar system is a trajectory that requires an almost incomprehensible level of drive and defiance.
Defiance might be the perfect word, and I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Think about the central paradox of this story. The music that ultimately united a fractured, segregated youth culture into a single, joyous demographic was created by a man who, at his core, trusted almost no one but his guitar and a briefcase of cash.
Right.
You have to wonder, is the joyous, rebellious spirit of rock and roll actually rooted in a deep, paranoid survivalist cynicism? It's a heavy thought to carry the next time you hear that famous guitar riff kick in.
The history certainly reshapes the way you experience the rhythm. Thank you for joining us as we explored these sources.
Keep questioning the history behind the hits, and we'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.